Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know, because we're in our 18th year, we interview writers about their craft, their ambitions, what they're bringing out, and what inspired them originally to write. We cast a pretty wide net, so if you have ideas for writers or other artists who might be on our program, watch for our address at the end of the program. I also want to remind you that past episodes are available at Sawyer Library. You can go in and take out a past episode or most of the past episodes as you would a book, take it home and watch it again, and then don't forget to bring it back. Tonight, I'm very happy to say we do have a writer, a distinguished Gloucester Cape Ann writer by the name of Chester Brigham. I'm sure that name is familiar to you because he's brought out a couple of very, very popular books over the last several years. Chet grew up in Melrose and Gloucester, summering with his family for many years up here on the Cape. He attended Colby College and then had a long career as a writer in the business world. Probably you've known him from a couple of books about Gloucester, however, published over the last 5 years. The first was The Stream I Go A-Fishing In, on the musical adventures of Gloucester's schoonerman John Watson, a very interesting character who was both an active fisherman as well as a distinguished musician and composer. From that book, the musical The Fiddling Fisherman was produced here in Gloucester to much acclaim. That was in 2003. Now, this year, 2007, another book on Gloucester was published titled Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea by Chet Brigham, and that's the book we're going to discuss mostly this evening. Welcome to the show, Chet.
Glad to be here, John.
I'm glad you could make it. You've been very busy writing books in the new century here. What inspires your interest in Gloucester and Gloucester's history?
Well, actually, this is one I've been working on off and on over the years.
How many years?
Well, I'd hate to put a date because that would really age me. But from a pretty early age, I became fascinated with how much there was here, what a rich environment it was in art and literature and maritime history. And I began collecting what I could on all of this, and I began to acquire a Gloucester shelf, as many of us have, and began looking for what was the source of all this, what was the origin of this remarkable output of art and literature, sculpture. And finally I decided that it was the maritime heritage. It came down to that, the rich maritime heritage that we have here. The trading days of the merchant traders and the square riggers, and then primarily, of course, the fishing schooners of the 19th century. And they seem to be the ones that had the greatest impact on writers and artists here, all the way from Kipling and T.S. Eliot to Olson and the arts, from Winslow Homer to of course our own Fitzhenry Lane, and later Duveneck and Sloane and so many more, right down to the present. And I'd seen that bits of this here and there, but I thought it would be kind of nice to put it all together in one place, sum up this culture of ours all between two covers. And I thought a nice time to do it would be on the 400th anniversary of the first writing and art on Cape Ann, but I missed by a year. It was last year, 400 years ago, in 1606, that Samuel de Champlain sailed into Gloucester Harbor. Previous year he'd been off Thatcher's Island, and came ashore there. But the next year when he came, he drew this map and with a description and illustration of the first encounter of the white man with the Indians in Gloucester. So here he was, the first writer and the first artist on Cape Ann 400 years ago. and it all began there. It's gone from that time forward.
And there's a marker in East Gloucester, I think right near Rocky Neck to Champlain.
That's right.
Mentioning his,
Rocky Neck
one of his landings.
Rocky Neck calls itself the North America's oldest art colony, and they could really date it to 1606.
So it's true.
It's
You
true,
can back it
and
up.
his crew were ashore on Rocky Neck doing some laundry chores when they saw a number of Indians approaching in a discreet manner until they saw the Frenchmen with their arquebuses, their blunderbusses, and they beat a hasty retreat and said that they had 2,000 more of their friends from the tribe who would love to meet the French. And Champlain and his his shipmaster decided that this area was not ready for
Civilization.
to hang around very long. So they set sail, and the French never came back. And it's interesting to think what might have happened if Gloucester had become a French
Yes.
colony.
Indeed. So they came on land to do laundry. They didn't come on land to paint that first visit in Rocky Neck.
Not his crew, no. But he came primarily as a chart maker for the expedition, which was a very important role in the 16th century, to be an accurate chart maker. And he was really the second in command of the first two voyages that he made.
So he wasn't interested in establishing a fishing station as the later English were, as the Dorchester people were.
Well, really, yes. The French were interested because they had established a station at Bar Harbor, and they were working their way down the coast with the expectation of setting up more colonies, at least stations, trading stations, perhaps. But once they were met by this unfriendly reaction from the Indians, they gave it up. And Champlain, a few years later, became the founder of Quebec. So they changed their whole direction northward.
This is the book. I want to hold this up, Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea. I want to make sure we get that as visible as possible. Where is this available, Chet?
Pretty much around town, all the bookstores here. In fact, even in Borders in Boston and Cambridge and up as far as the Maine Maritime Museum. So we've had pretty good distribution on it.
Good, good. I was interested in something you said earlier. Your interest in all of the cultural aspects of Gloucester, economics as well, stems primarily from the fishing. You think everything blossoms from that?
Yes.
And that led you to, say, Watson in the earlier book and studying Eliot and...
Yeah, that's right. The fishing is a central fact in Gloucester's maritime heritage. But it's not the fishing alone. It began with the trading vessels. But what I like to point out is that Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea, my thinking behind the title, was that after the embargo of 1807 and the War of 1812, all of these other ports along the Massachusetts and New Hampshire coast that had been significant trading ports, they went into decline because after those wars, the fleets were so decimated that all that business went to Boston. And Boston then had the financing for larger ships to make greater ocean voyages for trading, which places like Salem and Gloucester could not do. But all of these other towns, ports, Salem, Newburyport, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, they all turned away from the sea and went into manufacturing. Salem even built a rail line from the Lowell mills down to Salem. But Gloucester, the merchants in Gloucester went to fishing, stayed with the sea. They kept that focus to the sea. And it's the only town along the only port along the northern New England coast where this happened. And And Gloucester, ever since, has maintained this focus on the sea. Sorry.
No, excuse me for
Yeah.
interrupting, but I want to ask you a big question there. If the sea is the big driver here in Gloucester,
Yeah.
out of which all of the other the qualities and the richness of the life in Gloucester drew its energy,
Right.
can that continue with the diminishing of the fishing industry now?
I think it can, because I don't say just the fishing. It's the maritime heritage. And this maritime heritage has evolved so that the Port of Gloucester now, as it is less of a fishing town, it's still maritime, with whale watching, with marinas, and with a lot of the other activities on the port. I could read a little something from the book.
I'm going to ask you to. Would you,
Just
yeah,
to make that point.
please.
Actually, it's it's at the end, but I think it talks to that point. Many in Gloucester persist in making a living from the ocean in one way or another. In a recent issue of the List of Residents, the people of Gloucester listed their occupations not only as commercial fishermen, many, but as clammer, fish cutter, lobsterman, lobsterwoman, lumper, lobster broker, fish hauler, drawbridge operator, marine surveyor, ship's carpenter, compass assembler, dockmaster, fish biologist, shrimp packer. Others are engaged in the relatively benign ecotourism of the whale watch fleet. The development of a cruise ship terminal suggests new opportunities for squeezing a day's pay out of the harbor. So I think now we hear an awful lot about Blackburn Park and industry coming into Gloucester and so forth, but still an awful lot of the focus in Gloucester is on the harbor and on the many
And
trades.
so that's not changing in your view.
That's, in my view, that's something that is going to go on.
What is, if you can summarize the whole book, what is Gloucester's bargain with the sea, or is that the bargain?
That, I think, is the bargain, and that bargain has been at the core of this bountiful maritime culture, again, the maritime to me is not just the harbor, but it's all of Cape Ann, and it's some of these other aspects. The nature here is so astonishingly great. The rocks and counterpointed beaches and ledges, granite ledges, which other places don't have. They may have beaches, but they don't have both. And this was an attraction to visitors and tourists, but they came very hesitatingly, because there were a lot of disincentives to coming to Cape Ann. One was the granite industry at the end of the Cape, and you had all these booms from the explosions, the drills, the stone dust that was giving the workers silicosis of the lungs. And so it took a certain amount of courage to come out here and be a tourist. Elizabeth Stewart Phelps talks about going through the harbor, sort of tiptoeing through the harbor area to get to East Gloucester, where she had to build a cottage near Niles Beach. But she talked about Gloucester being the fishiest of little cities, and how awful it was, the lanes of the harbor.
So these things look a little more pristine and beautiful from our distance than they were at the time.
Absolutely, and that tended to, some did come by boat, 40-cent boat ride from Boston, and some by the train. But as far as getting around Gloucester in any large numbers, that didn't happen really until the 1920s, when the roads finally became well passable. So there was that. There was the granite industry itself, which was really a maritime trade, because those quarries were attractively dug near the harbors of Lanesville and Rockport, so it was easier to get the stone down to the water, and often the stone slopes elsewhere. The Dogtown, in a way, is a kind of a counter, the reverse of the coin, because Dogtown seemed to reflect in a negative way the villages along the shore, and a lot of them were a lot of the people in Dogtown seem to have been refugees from those villages.
So these are the people that didn't like the bargain.
Yeah, but they were
in a
part of
way.
it. They were part of it, and they appealed to a certain variety of writers and artists like Marsden Hartley, who did some of his most famous painting on Dogtown Common. So there were these different aspects of the maritime culture.
You said something interesting about the villages and the sections of Gloucester. Do they own their really distinct, still surviving identities to the fact that Gloucester was so big geographically and there wasn't a lot of communication? They were kind of isolated, separate villages.
That's true.
Before the 20s?
That's true, and
So if
that
you
had
wanna-
a lot to do, I think, with why the individuality of Cape Ann has been preserved. With poor transportation, people generally going from village to village by boat rather than on mud tracks.
Oh, is that right? So people would go, if they wanted to go from Lanesville to East Gloucester, they would go by boat rather than get on their horse, or?
Yes, right. As a matter of fact, there was the only way to get from Wheeler's Point to the Annisquam Church was by boat. There wasn't any road that connected through there. But this independence of the harbor and of the villages became so ingrained that by the time the tourists did get here, they were really tolerated rather than welcomed. And I think even today there is that element, that aspect of Gloucester's.
I think there is.
I mean, the Chamber of Commerce wouldn't like to hear that, but I think there is that, and I think a lot of people respect it and like it. I think a lot of artists like the fact that the character of Gloucester is independent enough that it's not kowtowing to tourism.
So Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea is about how we, the city of Gloucester, have used the ocean in our maritime culture to feed all the other cultures that have sprung from that. But it's not necessarily only the fishing industry
That's
that
true.
we're talking about.
That's true. But the fishing industry created much of it. As Stuart Davis, the artist, said that there was an architectural beauty in the Gloucester schooner. Some of the artists that had began painting in Annisquam came to Rocky Neck because there was much more of the harbor at Rocky Neck to paint. And somehow the harbor exerted a huge influence. And I think that this is not attributable necessarily to the fisheries or the ships, but there is this light and this, whether it's a refraction off the rocks and the water or whatever it is, that has had an enormous influence on an awful lot of painters. From Winslow Homer began doing watercolors in Gloucester. John Sloan did his first outdoor paintings in Gloucester and changed his style completely from the Ashcan school paintings that he had been doing. And a number of other artists.
And later, Ashcan people, the Bernstein and Meyerowitz, spent a great deal of their time
They
up
certainly
here.
did, and they were part of the later group that particularly in East Gloucester and Rocky Neck were tremendously influenced somehow by the light and the color, as well as the geometry of the rocks that John Wilmerding suggested in his first book, I think, and he talked about the different light, the brilliant light. So that's part of the maritime, but it was an additional attraction somehow. That's part of the natural beauty here that is, I think, is wrapped up in this
Yeah.
maritime heritage.
I notice you have a couple other passages marked there. I'm hoping you can read another section of the book.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I could, on the at the end of my schooner chapter, because the losses were so terrific, and when a man is lost at sea, there's no closure for the family. It's always a question mark. It's always he's out there somewhere in the deep, which is unlike any other death. And I try to sum that up. Gloucester had established a connection with the sea as close as was possible for any shore community. Its people knew all about mythic connections with the omnipresent surrounding ocean. Men overdue at sea were, on the face of it, statistics, but in another sense became one with a mysterious unknown. Had they joined the ranks of Billy Johnson overboard from the Mary E., who would never find his way back to his wife on Cape Ann, Billy, as everyone knew, fell in love with the siren of the deep, and down among the mermaids, underneath the sea, lives Billy Johnson, also bold and free. The fishing families of Gloucester could not have told you who Ulysses was, but the legends that reach back to the Odyssey and beyond lived in their folk memories. Had a lost fisherman been marooned 7 years on the uncharted island of a calypso-like sea nymph? Had curious shipmates disobeyed orders and opened the bag loaned in trust by the keeper of the winds, unleashing a hurricane upon their vessel? Would there, after all, finally be a tearful reunion between a long-lost captain and his Gloucester Penelope? There was no telling what might become of a fisherman after his vessel departed upon the ocean highways.
Very nicely done. I like the connection between Ulysses and the Odyssey and some of the history of Gloucester. It's a good connection.
Well, I think there is that sort of mythic sense that goes back to ancient times. It goes far back beyond 1605 or 1604. It's a folk heritage as well as the maritime heritage, I think.
I just got a 5-minute signal from Seneca Nagello, who is the engineer and director this evening. So I want to get to a couple of questions before we close. What are you planning next? Besides selling Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea, what's on your docket?
Well, I'm kicking around a couple of things, but I've opened some files on my computer and closed them down again because I couldn't find enough that really got me interesting. So I'm still looking for something that has that real fire of interest.
So you looked for a couple of topics, but they didn't turn you on.
That's true. They didn't really turn me on.
Are you going to stay in Gloucester and Cape Ann as a subject pool?
I think certainly yes. Whether it would be something that would branch out, but certainly based on Gloucester and the Gloucester experience. Because, for example, the people here, they come from so many different places, and that's a fascinating aspect of it to me. Is how many come from Sicily and how many down across the Gulf of Maine from Nova Scotia and so forth. So I'm trying to pull something together in that area, but I don't have anything specific as yet.
I was fascinated by the fact that your first book was about a man who fished, John Watson, but also became a nationally known composer and a musician. He was a musician himself, I believe. Are you tempted to go back to the arts? You mentioned many painters earlier, very knowledgeably.
Yes.
And I wonder.
Yes, I am tempted there, but I haven't found I haven't found something that would be different. There's been so much written about all of them, and a lot. You go back. There's a surprising amount from the Cape Ann Historical Association. You look back at their show programs, and there's an awful lot that's fascinating on these Cape Ann the artists who painted on Cape Ann.
There's a wonderful Lane exhibit going on.
Oh yeah.
Now it has been going on for some time.
Absolutely, yes.
So we'll have to wait to find out what you decide before we even get a hint of the next book.
Well, I hope you'll have me on for the next one.
I'd be glad to. I think we're about out of time, and so I want to begin to wrap up. Thanks very much, Chet Brigham, for being with us. This is the book, Gloucester's Bargain with the Sea. I get my fingers out of the way. It's available in town and Borders.
At Borders.
Amazon.
And I would mention that
online?
it's available both hardcover and paperback.
Okay.
Two editions.
All right. Good for Christmas presents.
Absolutely.
That's the book, and thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
I want to thank our TV audience as well for being with us tonight. If you've learned something from Chet Brigham about how Gloucester has bargained with the sea for its identity over the many centuries of Gloucester's existence, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thanks for being with us, and I hope to see you next week on the Writer's Block. Good night.